Joining us now from the from Fox Sports and the Pac-12 Network is Evan Moore. Evan, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Hope you guys are doing well too. Not this week hasn't been full of great news, that's for sure. But we're plugging along out here on the West Coast.
Evan, with a couple of days to digest it now, the decision of the Pac-12 to not play football in the fall in any sports until January the 1st. What's the mood as you've had a couple of days to really kind of wrap your mind around this?
Well, look, the general mood and reaction, I think, across the entire Pac-12 footprint is disappointment for obvious reasons, right? And that's led with football. Now, you're right, it does go beyond football into winter sports, at least for now, until January 1st. But it's disappointment because we were looking at, a week ago, I was on Pac-12 radio talking about the schedule release and what lied ahead. And what I've really, over the last couple of days, been able to wrap my mind around is that it appears the Pac-12 conference and the Big Ten, for that matter, kind of had two different paths they were on with this whole thing. One being the obvious one, where there was a group within the conference that was tasked with, coming up with a schedule, getting ready for the season, handling it from a PR standpoint. And then another that involved the key stakeholders and the presidents and, the people that are making the decisions that had kind of given themselves an internal deadline closer to the start of training camp, which is this week, and finally got together and started to digest more information regarding health and safety and decided to shut it down. And it seemed sudden. I think all of us that follow college football on this past Saturday started to hear a lot of the ominous rumors about what lied ahead for the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and started to become doubtful about that. Now, I will note that some of this is specific to the Pac-12 conference and that, the reasons they decided to punt on this thing, one of the biggest ones is the health restrictions that are in place in various counties across the Pac-12 footprint. I'm not sure other conferences have quite the challenge that like USC and UCLA have right now, where they can't even get back on the field because of LA County public health restrictions. And then the other side of it is the danger that it presents immediately to college athletes. And that's the part, guys, that I've just been really frustrated with, because the opinions on that, the medical opinions from professionals, are all over the board. Pac-12 claims that it has information that nobody would play if they read. Well, it's like, Duke's infectious disease expert who leads the ACC task force, who I'm sure is a pretty smart guy, feels differently, right? Tulane's guy that leads up the American Athletic Conference, he feels differently. So the wide range of opinions relating to the threat presented to the college athlete is frustrating to me, because there's a lot at stake here, right? We know how important college sports are to these towns, to these universities, to these kids, and the well-being of so many people. And so we can't look at this like, hey, it's just a risk-free option of shutting it down, because it's not. There's a lot at stake, and for that reason, it's really disappointing.
Evan, you mentioned some of the things that take place in California and Oregon and Washington, some of the states within the Pac-12, and I always felt like that was going to be the biggest hurdle for them, because they have different rules and protocols in place than really anywhere else in the country. And I'm surprised you're not hearing more about that, more about the restrictions that are within these states alone.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jacob, and I'll emphasize that again. Like the four reasons the Pac-12 claims, its medical advisory committee claims that it shut it down, was one, viral spread, relating to contributing to viral spread if we continue to play football, and their thoughts on that. Two was health restrictions. Three was the myocarditis factor, then kind of the new idea that this thing could really start to hit athletes. I know myocarditis is not a new concept, but as it relates to COVID, I think they got more information on that. And then the fourth is testing and or lack thereof with regard to frequency. But to your point about health restrictions, yeah, I mean that's the part that the conference can't control. It's the governor of the state of California, Gavin Newsom, and then the LA County health officials and the various of these counties throughout the footprint. Those restrictions are real, right? And there's no way to get around those. And at least for the California schools, those were going to be heavily problematic as they try to get back to playing football. And like I said, I'm not familiar quite as much with how much that's a challenge in other areas around the country and how much other counties and other states are dealing with that. But I can tell you in the Pac-12, that was a big hurdle to try to get past. And fortunately, though, that's not necessarily something that you could point to would be a reason that the Big 12 or the SEC or the ACC would shut it down, because that's a geographically specific issue that the Pac-12 has had to deal with.
Evan Moore is our guest from Fox Sports and the Pac-12 Network. Evan, you played college basketball at Stanford in addition to college football. This decision to move everything past January 1st affects that sport as well. what do you think the immediate future is for the college basketball players? And if you were still playing, would you be more concerned about the spread of this from basketball or football?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first part for basketball, obviously basketball typically starts, around Thanksgiving weekend. We start to see some exhibition type things that are a lot of fun to watch on television. Then we get into December and have a lot of good non-conference matchups. Those are obviously, at least in the Pac-12, and the Big Ten has not gotten specific about that yet, but the Pac-12 has, that those won't take place this year. Now, the rumors are that there are some plans in place to make the basketball season work if we can get there, as it relates to travel and trying to have like kind of bubble type scenarios in the Pac-12. I got to be honest, guys, I have my doubts. I mean, if we're in a position right now where we can't nail testing, at least I'm speaking specifically to the Pac-12 now, we can't do testing frequently enough to make the medical advisory committee comfortable. And there's enough, and this was the biggest thing. I said 4 different things, but the reality is the biggest thing was, in their minds, the uncertainty relating to the long-term effects of COVID. And if those are still there, I just have a really hard time believing you're going to tell me in 4 or 5 months that we're going to have all that stuff figured out. Right? And I'm not being pessimistic because I am trying to feed that narrative of, hey, we got to be careful. I think we should play. I'm just saying, in the mindset of the medical committees that have to make these decisions with liability and liability in mind and navigating those different things with the presidents, if they made this decision today, I just really have a hard time believing that in February they're ready to say, okay, we got testing figured out, we're comfortable with long-term effects, let's cut this thing loose. I have my doubts, and it hurts me, it pains me to say that, but I have my doubts. And then relating to spring football, I just don't, Jacob, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this too. I just don't think that's a very viable option. Even if it's an abbreviated season in the spring, is abbreviated to the point where it's not even close to a normal season, well, what's the point, right? I mean, I just feel like we won't see football again in the Pac-12 until the fall of 2021.
Evan, for me, when you look at a spring football season, I mean, you play at the highest level. You know this. We stay on schedule because we have to have our schedule. We started in January to get ready for a football season that starts in September, and there's a process to lead up to that. And so when you get out of that process, that's number one. And you talk about player safety. Well, if you're playing 20-plus games in one calendar year in college, that's not what you typically do. You typically play 12 games in a bowl game, so you get 13 games. So there's that. And also, Evan, what if you go out there and you have a year-long injury? Say you tear your ACL, your labrum, whatever that might be. So you're telling me I'm going to miss 2 seasons? I mean, that's just 3 things off the top of my head when I think about a spring football season. We hadn't even got, Evan, into the NFL draft and scouting and some of these guys trying to go to the Senior Bowl and all these other things that trying to get ready for the combine and all these type of things that you have to do.
Yeah, all those are great points, and that's exactly what I would have said. And look, when I think of, like I just said a minute ago about, you're telling me we're going to have all this stuff figured out about long-term effects that the medical advisory boards are worried about, and the reason they're really scrapping the football season. So you're telling me I'm going to have that figured out and play, like you said, in a I wouldn't even say a full calendar year. I'll say like 10 months. So we're going to play, for some teams, 23, 24 games. Even if you have an abbreviated spring season, you could see 23, 24 games over a 10-month period. Any health and safety benefit you're getting from shutting down the season, in my mind, you're completely offsetting by playing that many games in 2021. Now, look, I realize orthopedic issues that stem from football are different than some of the issues that they think COVID presents to these student athletes. Okay, fine. But how about CTE and all the stuff that we're talking about with concussions, right? I mean, everyone that's ever played football knows that there's a lot of risk that comes with playing football. And the concussion thing, to me, is sort of something that a lot of these presidents around these conferences have started to lump COVID in with. And what I mean by that is it's kind of unknown. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of liability. But CTE is something that's gradually presented itself over, a multi-year period, and we've been able to stomach that risk as a community and as football players. But COVID has come on like a tidal wave for these people as far as not knowing how this thing works. And from March till now, they've been trying to digest it. And I don't think this one they're willing to just accept like they are with CTE, right? So, look, my point is football is wrought with risk, right? So you're gonna be hard pressed to tell these athletes that, like, hey, we're not going to play this fall because there's too much risk on the table. That's a tough thing. That's a tough thing to try to tell them.
So we had a question on our app about what do they think is going to be different in January? The virus will still be here. So are they pinning their hopes on we're just going to shut everything down until there's a vaccine? Because that seems to me that that's the bleakest possible outlook.
Yeah, I agree with you. It also seems like a pipe dream, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we have 330 million people in this country. Like, if we all of a sudden get a vaccine, how available is it going to be, right? Those are all questions I think everybody has. But specific to the Pac-12, I think what it comes down to regarding pausing and possibly playing in early 2021, I think it comes down to two things. And I think one is just managing the spread within the communities in the Pac-12 footprint, right? Like the data needs to be below a certain threshold to make them feel comfortable and make the health officials feel comfortable. And then secondly, I think it comes down to testing, right? The NFL has a contract with a private lab and can do testing between now and September 5th, basically daily. And the Pac-12 decided it couldn't pull that off, at least right now. And so you'd think, hey, the argument that these guys are safer within the confines of their football programs, I completely agree, especially if they're being tested daily, right? So if we can find out who has it and all this, then I think we're in a lot better shape. And I think the Pac-12 thinks that it might be able to nail daily, immediate feedback type testing earlier next year as opposed to right now. And if that helps, okay, then that's the reason. Again, I think we should be playing, but I think that's the reason that they're punting to 2021.
Evan, a couple things before we let you go. One, you sound way too intelligent to be Matt Flynn's friend. You've done fantastic. I don't know how you and Flynn have conversations because he's not on your level. And
Flynn's one of my favorite people in the world, man. One of my favorite people in the world.
You were doing so well, man.
And two, so Evan, when we started this show about 3 years ago, Matt and I were doing 1 or 2 days a week together, and he was co-hosting with me, and we're like, dude, we're going to be able to get like all the guests that we want. He's like, dude, I'm going to help you out. You know how many guests he's gotten to date?
Am I like the second or third?
You're the only guest. And that was like our second show of all time. And so he thought enough of you. You've been the only guest in 3 years that he brought to the table. Now, you've been fantastic, so he did really nice. Maybe he wanted to end on a high note, but one guest.
Well, hey, that's an honor, right? And I think Matt it sounds like the rest of Matt's Rolodex he'd be embarrassed about, so he wanted to pass on that.
Yeah. By the way, Matt's at the beach right now when he's supposed to be working. So, does anything surprise you with Flynn?
Nothing. He's probably working on that tan, man. He's too pasty. I've seen pictures of him lately. He needs to work on that.
Pasty and dad bod. We'll end on that one.
That's right. Well, hey guys, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.